On the screen, when they introduce him, they say a new plan to save the world. So they're now going from saying the oceans may rise by a few inches and a few polar bears might die, which is an extreme fraud, to putting out the visual idea, the asinine statement that the planet may be destroyed. Ambitious plan to save the planet. On screen, they're saying, we are saving the planet. And then the Microsoft former head of technology says, but we have a plan. And when we come back, we're going to play that where they show these giant blimps to spray sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, how can the globalists, the UN, the United States, Britain, go and put up these blimps at the North and South Pole, as he says they're going to do, without asking the rest of the world? Also, what are these chemtrail devices, these aerosol devices, really going to do? He talks about tipping points. That's what the father of weather weapons, meteorologist Ben Livingston, who flooded Vietnam during the war, who created hurricanes, weakened hurricanes, now declassified, came on this show and explained to you that it's tipping points they can manipulate. We already know there's a giant covert weather modification program that John P. Holder in the White House science czar now admits was just a test, that they're now going operational. So see, they now have to introduce it to you. Now, what they don't tell you up front is that Bill Gates, and let's search this during the break and show people when we come back, owns patents on hurricane killing systems or hurricane strengthening systems. The search would be Bill Gates patents hurricane weather control. I forget the exact headlines. He also has the patents on this. So this is his corporate minion. And, of course, Microsoft itself is an NSA/CIA front. So is IBM. That's come out on record. And so the globalists are going to play God. They're going to control your weather. HAARP, I've had the director of HAARP on, admitting that they can ignite the atmosphere with HAARP. Then during the break, the Air Force came on the line, griped at him and said, don't talk about that. John Harmon heard that. The guy running the show up in Minnesota. I'm down here in Austin. I ought to get John on to talk about that. I always talk about having him talk about it, but we should have him on. But the issue is there is weather modification going on. We're going to come back and finish up with this. Up on screen for PrisonPlanet.tv viewers, you can read the headline, USA Today, Hurricane Calming Technology. Bill Gates has a plan. And then you find out he has all these weather control patents because he's a government consortium front. A shadow government front, they give him all the patents they had decades ago. Everything he talks about, everything they have in these patents is at least 30 years old. The Stanford Research Institute for the Navy Weapons Laboratory had patents for doing exactly what they talk about here in 1967. That's now been declassified as of 4 years ago. And I saw a story where the name Ben Livingston was in there as the father of weather weapons, how they flooded Vietnam when there were no clouds. They would go in and create them. How in the 40s he was the first guy to fly into typhoons that are over 50 miles an hour, in some cases even faster, 200 miles an hour total. Again, in the Pacific, the hurricanes get even more powerful. They call them typhoons. He flew into those. I mean, this guy's amazing. And we have that video interview, by the way, where he came to Austin at PrisonPlanet.tv. They had all of this. And so now they're introducing it to you. Oh, we can put blimps up. Oh, we've been testing with aircraft spraying. Oh, this is a giant program in full swing. And we know they're already manipulating the weather. And the issue is they could create horrible, catastrophic weather events with this. That's on record, and then tell you it's natural and scare everyone into submitting to global government. This is literally the elite playing God. That's what they're doing. That's what they want. That's why the Pentagon calls it owning the weather. And that's one of their declassified reports. Just Google Pentagon report, owning the weather in 2025. They already own it, folks. Here it is.
arms and firemen that will race up here and so forth. Because although it's low probability, it's severe. In this case, we don't even know what the probability is of how severe it can be without there being very severe consequences. We also don't know when we're going to get around to getting serious. So it seems to me that we need to have a plan B. We need to have a way to buy ourselves some time if it starts getting serious quickly. Now, what else could you do? And the answer is a topic called geoengineering, which says, can we directly try to intervene? So to use an analogy, we all know we're supposed to eat right and exercise a lot. And if we did that, we would, a lot of heart disease, diabetes, tons of other diseases, we'd be better off. Turns out that's hard for people to do. And as a result, you also have interventions that you would do, like heart surgery, that you might do to get a stent put in or to have a bypass operation, because if you neglect the problem long enough, that's what you have to do. Well, the equivalent of that surgery in this case are means to directly intervene. Now, one approach is to take the CO2 and suck it out of the atmosphere. Now, how do you do that? We turn actually to Benjamin Franklin. In 1783, there's a volcano called Loki in Iceland. I've been there to visit it, that erupted, causing a tremendous winter in 1784 in the northern hemisphere. So Benjamin Franklin gives a paper. He says it was the volcano. Well, we know today through lots of...
How did he figure that out?
He has a great... It's a wonderful thing. I wish I had the text to read here because it's in this sort of quaint English of that era, where he says that it blocked the many rays of the sun. Huh. And so far as we know today, Ben was right. And we know this because in 1991, Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines exploded. And there's been lots of volcanoes since then, but a very large volcano that's got a tremendous amount of power will put a lot of gases and particles into the very upper atmosphere, the stratosphere. Mount Pinatubo did. It caused global temperatures to drop by about 1 degree Fahrenheit for about a year and a half afterwards. Now, that's interesting because that's about the amount of global warming that we have today. So
if you could just have a Mount Pinatubo every year.
A Mount Pinatubo on demand would do it.
And what is it doing? What is the chemical process? It's spewing sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. Why is that?
So when you have small aerosol particles, light will scatter off of them. That scattering is why, one range of that scattering is why the sky is blue. Another range of that scattering is why milk is white, actually. So it turns out sulfur dioxide is very good at scattering light. And if you have sulfur dioxide, it's what gives the rotten egg smell in part, or that and hydrogen sulfides at Yellowstone or other places you have geysers. Enough of those particles will scatter light. If you had a system for delivering sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, you could easily dim the Earth by dim the sun by 1%, and even do it in a way that wouldn't be visible.
So how do you pump sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere on demand?
The first things that you'd think of, like, oh, let's load it into 747s and carry it up, are way too expensive. So you need a cheap way to get a lot of stuff up there. So we set out to invent something like that. We've come up with actually a couple ways to do it, but I'll tell you the simplest one, which is you run a hose to the sky. It sounds nuts, but you take a hose, you suspend it on a series of balloons, helium balloons. You want to run it 25 kilometers up, because that takes you up into the stratosphere. Now, the
25-kilometer garden hose.
Now, that's the interesting part. If you go through a calculation of how much you need, in our best scheme, it's like a fat garden hose. The total amount of rate that you're pumping is about 30 gallons a minute. Okay, that's less than a swimming pool pump. So it's actually a very manageable sized problem once you come up with this idea that you put the stuff up there. The best place to put it is in very high latitudes. That's very far north, or in the southern hemisphere, very far south. So northern Canada, Russia, someplace like that, that's up 60, 70 degrees north.
So run one of these garden hoses at the North Pole, basically, one at the South Pole, turn them on every year,
yep.
and you've solved the problem of global warming?
Well, we've done a series of computer simulations that tell us exactly that. That one of these units at 60 to 70 north, with a set of assumptions about how you put the aerosol up there, would negate global warming as we have it today, and by putting it up there would particularly protect the Arctic. And once you protect the Arctic, you shut off a bunch of these potential tipping point mechanisms. Once you cool the Arctic, our simulations show that in fact you draw enough heat from the rest of the hemisphere that you bring the rest of the hemisphere into line, and you don't have any severe dislocations of the weather.